Hi there. You're listening to the Perio Patient Podcast, a podcast for my patients and anyone else who cares to listen. My name is Dr. Ben Young, and I am a periodontist in private practice in San Antonio, Texas. This podcast, episode 61, I have entitled Practice Principle Number 1. If this is your first time listening, well, welcome. These podcasts come out of either what is going on in my practice at the moment or something interesting I'm studying that I think you might find interesting. Recently, I had what I simply will describe as a disappointment. It was an infection following a procedure, and as disappointed as I was, the patient was even more. I'm purposely keeping it all vague to protect patient confidentiality, but also for what I want to talk about, it really doesn't matter the details. It helps simply to represent a reality that sometimes things don't turn out the way we hope they will. This is just one of the challenges when treating human beings. Sometimes people get sick, and sometimes their timing in getting sick coincides with the procedure they're having, and one affects the other. That's a possibility. My point is that some of the care we provide as providers or receive as patients are not completely in our control or even in the other person's control. But regardless the reason, we end up with a result that disappoints. In this particular case, it resulted in the failure of a dental implant. Another time these things can happen is in soft tissue grafting. And what I've learned to tell patients is, I've placed this graft, and now you're going to go home and rest, and we will watch it over time. If something changes in it that we're not happy with, we will eventually address it after the healing is completed, but I don't want you to lose sleep over it, and I won't lose sleep over it. However it turns out, we will deal with it, and we will make it work. But we have to cooperate in order to do that. So that's another one that comes up. So what does this have to do with the title of my episode, Practice Principle Number 1? It's because this principle, when I'm following it, enables both me and the patient to continue to work together in spite of setbacks. And this is the first of what I will describe as 3 practice principles. And I'll share this podcast, and I'll share the other ones on podcasts to come. Today's principle is what I call clear communication. Now, understand, my training as a dentist obviously involved learning to communicate with patients and others, but it was not thought of then as I think of it now. My opinion as to the importance of clearly communicating in patient care has deepened over time. The talking and writing skills I entered dental school with, I later left with pretty much the same, because that wasn't the focus of the training I received. The training I received had to do with all of the procedures and diagnostic things, everything dealing with dentistry, not with how do you talk with patients. And yet, ever since my graduation from dental school, it has repeatedly been brought home to me that if I fail to explain clearly enough for patients to be able to be comfortable with the decisions they will make, then it will affect the treatment I am then able to provide them. One of the biggest mistakes I think we make as providers is that we assume patients are cooperating with us simply because they are quiet and they sit and open their mouths And later on, we discover they weren't really clear, they didn't really understand, and now they have more questions and problems, and it derails the pattern of care that we can provide with them. So I try to avoid that. I want them clearly on board, and I want them to be able to feel totally comfortable expressing questions and all the rest. So honestly, in my first appointment with patients, I want to hear from them, and I want to hear them talking to me. And I'll try and draw that out of them as much as I possibly can, because clear communication is also their clear communication with me. Am I listening well? Am I getting what they're trying to tell me? A lot of times when I sit down with somebody, and maybe this has been you, I will sit down when I first greet or meet someone and simply ask them to tell me their story. And a lot of times that's pretty humorous, because they'll kind of, their eyes will widen and they'll say, well, what story is he wanting me to tell him? I just say, tell me your story. What's your story? And then if they're not clear, I just say, well, you've come here for some reason and there's a story behind it. Can you tell me what that is? And then they can begin to open up. And that, I find, is really helpful, that it's not directed at, I want to know this and this and this. I just want to know what you think's important. If you will express it to me, I think I have enough training to be able to fill in the blanks and get questions answered that you might not think of. So I can ask them, but I don't have to ask them first, and I don't have to ask them in a particular order, and I know what I'm going to need, so I'll get it. But this is the opportunity for the patient to be able to be listened to be heard. I think that's just absolutely critical. So because I found that it was really important to me that I have the time up front to listen to patients in a non-threatening way that has a lot of space around it, it resulted in my decision that if I'm going to provide additional time with patients in a schedule, that additional time would be up front, where we're listening and we're trying to determine what it is that the problem is and how to solve that, rather than putting it into the scheduled treatment delivery appointments. When people come back and they want to have treatment done, that's not the time that they really care to visit usually. And so the procedures go rather smoothly, especially if they feel comfortable that they know what's going on and they are trusting that the procedures are going to go well. One of the things I try to do under this idea of clear communication, and you can track me on this and hold me accountable if you're a patient, is at the very beginning of every appointment, I try to go over what it is we're going to do today and what we may be doing next time, to just kind of review. Today we're going to do this and this and this, and then I'll need to see you down the road at about this time frame, and we can schedule that, and then I'll tip you back and let's get started. And then the procedure goes through rather smoothly and we're done. So I don't put a lot of emphasis in spending a lot of time visiting at every appointment. I've put all that up front so people are very comfortable that they know what's going on and what's going to happen. And I've found this approach to work extremely well for me. But I've also found that it doesn't fit the needs of every patient. Some patients don't want to talk much, and others have a great deal to talk about, more than perhaps we can spend the time dealing with at that appointment. Until their needs are individually met, however, and it's to their satisfaction, I don't believe that the periodontal therapy I can provide will turn out as good for them as it can potentially be. So this is where podcasts like this, blogs on the website that I write, and occasional YouTube videos that I'll put out, things that help people to get to know me outside of the clinic and outside of the constraints of a tight schedule, help people in their own way to become more comfortable with who I am. And it also enables me, frankly, not to spend a lot of time talking about myself, because I'm not the focus of the office when a patient is there. The patient is always the focus of everything we're trying to do as we're working along. And this then brings up clear communication within my office. It's important that I talk clearly, of course, but I also recognize that I have selected team members who have the ability to communicate and reach people in ways I'm not able to for numerous reasons. And also they have areas of expertise that I do not have. For example, Bonnie she knows a lot more about dental insurance than I do. And then she teaches me, and I tell you about it on podcasts. So we have people in the office that have a great deal of information for patients. It isn't all coming from me. And the other thing is that there is the opportunity for people to review with others in the office. I'm not the only one that can talk about flossing procedures and brushing and all the rest of it. Everything that you hear as a patient, trust me, they've heard it hundreds of times themselves, and they can give you the same talks I can give you, probably even better. So now, before we end today's podcast, I just listened over what has been said thus far, and I want to add, before we close, why this is something I think can be useful in your own life. I've told you some of the behind the scenes elements of how I structure my own practice, and that probably would be even more useful on the Perio Hygienist podcast, talking to my professional colleagues. But yet I have chosen to talk with you as the patient or anyone else who cares to listen. And I can believe that there are students and dental hygienists and others listening along with patients. So what can you get from this that I've learned? As I said, this clear communication idea has just deepened with me over time. And I find, even in my own travels around as a patient and as a customer in other businesses, that sometimes I'm left confused as to what I'm supposed to do or what people want me to do. Every once in a while, however, I'm also pleasantly surprised. For example, I had a problem with my truck, and there was a check engine light, and I was at the dealership where they were working on it, and the fellow I scheduled with came over to me and said he'd like me to come back and meet the mechanic. He had something to show me, and so they proceeded to show me some of the problems that were involved with the engine and explain it to me. And I find all of that, even though, again, I'm disappointed because it sounds like it's going to be more money, it's still important, I think, in any, whether it's business or family life, that we attempt to communicate as best we can and as clearly as we can and as calmly we can, and not to avoid and put off difficult conversations. And that's kind of my point today. Is I've learned that the first thing we need to do is listen well and try to explain things as well as we can up front, explaining all options so that people can make appropriate, reasonable decisions, weighing all sides and then coming to some reasonable conclusion. It may not be one I would have done, but that's okay as long as I consider it a reasonable decision. I'm comfortable supporting that decision. That's my job. If it crosses over into something I would consider malpractice if I went into it, that I'm actually propping up a disease process that's going to harm somebody, then of course I can't accept that, and I won't treat that. And if they still insist on having it some way that I can't in good conscience accept for myself, then they'll have to find somebody else to work with. And I will tell you that that's a theoretical thing, because I've never really had that happen to me. Most people are very reasonable, and they'll understand if there's something that cannot be done, it's just not possible, then they accept it. Alternative to that is, a lot of times it is important to go and get second, third opinions. Don't take any individual's word for it, not even mine, because ultimately you have to make your own decision about it. And until you've made that decision, I'm not considering myself as treating you. I'm just consulting with you. Once we've gone through this consultation, evaluation, and a treatment plan and discussed everything, then if you make another appointment because you want me to treat something, then I will change hats and I will become the provider for you to do the treatment you're now requesting me to do. But before this, I try to be as neutral as I can and provide patients with every option that is reasonable, and then let them make their own decisions. So if you can apply that in your own life as to how you interact with people, how you prepare for talks in your own area of expertise, to try and take us lay people through what you know as your area of expertise, that would be great. Everything you can do to help others kind of track and make good decisions, I think will help in your relationships with others. Anyway, that's it for today. Next time we'll get into practice principle number 2, and I'm not going to even tell you what it is for now. This has been the Perio Patient Podcast, and I am still Dr. Ben Young. Thanks for listening. Let's talk again soon. The midget fortune teller who escaped from prison was a small medium at large.